Let's talk a little workstation here. You need at least two. You need a workstation that can connect to the rest of the world, and you need a workstation for imaging. Those workstations can be portable, but usually portables don't have nearly the power that we want for investigations. You need lots and lots of processing power to make anything happen. The peripherals, remember, you're going to have to connect to everything, and you don't want to be running out to your local hardware store to actually get a particular cable or connector right in the middle of your investigation. So have plenty of them on hand. If you can't have them on hand and you can't afford that, then you want to seriously consider for your lab to make sure that you have a local supplier that covers every kind of cable. Make sure that you also have 2 or 3 remote suppliers that can get you something drop shipped in a day or two for your organization, and make sure that you have a place to receive these packages that are coming across, that you don't get piled into a big shipping and receiving process. You need to have your own, especially when time is of the essence. When we're talking about these workstations, there used to be a set of specifications out there, but here I'm going to make it simple for you. What's your budget? Spend it all. That's all you can do when it comes to your workstations. They need to be as fast and as big as you possibly can, because you're competing with all the consumer devices that are out there, and the biggest, baddest workstations that are on the outside of your lab. You have to keep up with those. I think a refresh on computer equipment for forensics labs would be once a year. I think that would be reasonable. When it comes to disk drives, you should be monitoring what the largest size disk drives available to the public and to your organization. If you're just doing an internal forensics investigation, what's the largest hard drive? What's the largest RAID set? Be prepared to pull a copy of that with forensically sound disks. You may even carry around something like, for large data sets, you may carry around something like a Drobo box, which is portable RAID. It's not a big tool, but it's a really fast tool. On the backs of the new Drobo version N, I believe it's got USB 3, which is a pretty high data rate, and it's also got Thunderbolt, which is a very high data rate at this point. You don't want your tools that you're choosing to be the bottleneck in the source of a particular investigation. You don't want to be going slow. You can't afford to, because you've got to capture that evidence, review that evidence, and you've got to get that out to the court to the attorneys in the court as fast as possible. Make sure that workstation has every connector and plug and cable possible on it. I don't think that laptops will do it in most cases, except for when you're going out in the field. I think you need a tower unit with the ability to actually slide in lots of extra peripherals. Don't get me wrong. I think that the new Mac Pro workstation is the coolest thing in the entire planet, but I don't think you can slide every single different kind of card inside of there. Cool toy, but not really sufficient for this. Make sure that you've got expansion slots on the back. On your imaging workstation, this is dedicated to that one process of imaging. And so therefore, when you build this up, you make sure that you clearly document everything on that. And then once you finish building it up, you may even pull a reference image of that workstation on a separate hard drive that you can then say, okay, I've created my reference image, this is how I've done it, and I've actually pulled this reference image of this workstation out of this laptop, and I keep that separate. And every new investigation, I make an image of one of these particular drives and insert it into my workstation, so that the workstation then becomes a shell, and the hard drive is then forensically sound when you're walking in. It's not used, that hard drive in that machine is only used for that operating system and those tools. It's not used for capturing data off of that particular device that you're investigating. That would be on a separate drive or separate drives. When you're doing password cracking capability, besides your imaging workstation, you may need to have excessive GPUs in there. If you're looking at the NVIDIA right now, take a look at what's called the Tesla GPUs. They actually have these plug-in cards that have over 500 GPUs. That's graphical processing units inside of a single carriage. And there's a company called Elcom out there that actually has that takes advantage of the multiple GPUs in a box. This will give you lots and lots of password cracking capability. You want that not on your imaging station, but on another workstation within your organization. While we're on the subject, storage is a big deal here. I think storage area networks or network attached storage, or at least a decent RAID cabinet of something like a larger Drobo, would be a relevant tool for you to have in your lab. Don't make the mistake of saying that we need a storage area network completely separate from everybody else and spend millions of dollars on it, but you can't use a slice of a storage area network that's being used for regular processing. It must be separate. One of the last things that I want to talk about on hard drives is if you really need to protect your data, there are certain hard drives out there today that actually have AES encryption on the drive. This is not a separate piece of software. It is a separate card inserted inside the drive. Look at BusLink, and they actually have AES 256 encrypted drives with a physical key that you pull out, and you have to order those keys special if you lose them. Any kind of peripheral that you're going to need. If you're going to deal with hard drives of different kinds, make sure that you have every hard drive cable that's possible. Extra RAM, SCSI cards, power cords. Make sure that this is a workbench. Go back to those days of when you were actually processing hard drives, or when you were doing your A+ certification, and you had your workbench of all your parts to go ahead and assemble a computer. That same thing that you needed to assemble a computer is the exact same thing that you need in your forensics workstation. So look at your A+ course and look at all the things that you would need in that. That's at least the set that you're going to need for starting off your peripheral devices and being able to connect them up and be prepared to replace parts in computers. Your laptop's got to have hard drive connectors, and you may even have handheld devices that you're working with. Usually we're talking about write blockers here. Look at Tableau as the people who have a really valuable external handheld device. Okay, software in the lab comes in 3 flavors: forensic software, applications, and operating systems. When we're talking about forensic software, remember these are bitstream backup utilities. I would use a hardware copying device, not a software copying device, but you need this as a backup. You should be doing hardware, but when you're only down to software, go ahead and make that choice at that moment in time. You're going to have to balance the requirement that you have. Password recovery tools are a big deal. All of our partition recovery, searching tools, firewalls and intrusion detection system, everything that you would have in as the security for your entire enterprise, we need a small subset of that security for your forensics lab. And antivirus is always a big deal. Now that's forensic software. You can make those choices yourself, but most of the time as a rookie, somebody's going to say, well, we use this and you're going to use this and we have a license for it. When you're investigating a particular device, you need to have all of the applications that that device has on it in your reference set for your library so that you know how that application will interact with that operating system, what kind of data it generates, what kind of metadata it generates, so that you can record that and be prepared for your forensics investigation when that particular laptop comes in with all of those applications. So you need to have that stuff at your disposal. Sometimes that could be relatively expensive. I know some of the Photoshop suites and some of the tools that are like that can get into the thousands of dollars. Let's talk operating systems here. Now, I use TechNet and MSDN as an example of operating systems because you have to purchase all the different Microsoft operating systems. Now, that would be very cost prohibitive at this point if you were trying to get a hold of a version of NT4, a version of NT4 Service Pack 1, Service Pack 2, Service Pack 20, along with Windows 2000 and all its different service packs and all the different operating systems that are out there. So what you can do is you can purchase the ability from Microsoft through the TechNet up until the end of August, and through MSDN for the foreseeable future, where you can have a copy of all those different versions of the operating system going all the way back to DOS, I think it's 6.22 is the first DOS that you can purchase. But you can even get a Windows 3.11 in the library of all the TechNet and MSDN. You need those different operating systems so that you can do those experiments in your lab, so that you can prove that against the particular data that has been generated by the operating system that you're then using. You say, Dean, I don't do any Microsoft operating systems. I only do Linux. I only do Mac. Fine. You're going to need all the different versions of that and figure out where those facilities are. TechNet's just an example. When we're dealing with operating systems of phones, you're going to need some sort of operating system development environment. When we're dealing with Apple iPhones, there actually is a subscription for developers that will allow you to have an iPhone, iPad simulator that is actually installed on your Mac. You can also do the same thing with Android, and it's a little bit more difficult with BlackBerry. It's a significant cost for them. For the Apple development series, I think it's $99 a year for you to have access to all those facilities. Android that I know of is all free at this point unless you're having the paid for tools. Remember, the underlying operating system for Android is a variant of Linux that's stripped down. So that's the operating system and the software you need. That's the hardware that you need for your machines, and that's the applications that you should have on hand for your forensic lab.